If you look up the category movies with small cults on Wikipedia, listed under P would be The Princess Bride. Or Princess Pride, comma, the. You know what I mean. And that's not me being acidic because I love this film too, and I think no small part of its devotion is begotten by its charming framing device. The incredibly innocent grandpa and grandson character who are sharing the exciting parable you're watching as a simple bedtime story. It's certainly not the only movie that uses this trope, but when you see it lampooned, 9 times out of 10, Princess Bride specifically is what's being aped. The Princess Bride has this seriously authentic and infectious enthusiasm for its own craft, helped by its own excitement to be a straightforward story. Blah blah blah, movies are the modern myth. But this movie ran with that and used it for some terrific wit and heart. The movie I'm recommending you today is largely in conversation with that notion. Tarsem's The Fall.
And the masked bandit. They had one common enemy, Governor Odious.
Made in 2006, but largely stuck in distribution hell until 2008, The Fall is a lesser-known film because I think it's kinda hard to wrap one's head around who it's for, which I think is a symptom and also proof of the fact that I personally think it's really a crowd pleaser for any age. It's emotionally intelligent enough to a point that it can resonate with adults, but also really exciting and a bit zany, an out there blend of art house and high fantasy, but that fusion specifically caused it to be rejected by both parties. So it's very much stuck liminally, but I'd love to help it find a serious audience, and this seemed like a good place to start. The Fall is about 2 hospital patients in 1920s La La Land, a stuntman nursing an injury named Roy, and Alexandria, who's healing from the debilitating condition of being a cutie patootie. Look at this angel. Laid up by their condition with little else to do, Roy starts telling Alexandria an exciting adventure story, and it's through this story we get warped to Tarsem's wild imagination. Sensibilities to the tune of George Miller and Gore Verbinski mashed together and create an aesthetic unlike anything else I've ever observed. In an era of samey CGI and familiar fantasy assets, no small draw to The Fall was its hodgepodge of different myths, making a feverishly pretty collage of different influences. It's one guy's story he's telling a little kid, so he's not holding himself to a great deal of logic or continuity, which means Italian demo men, historic slavery survivors, and Charles Darwin can all unite against a common enemy. As Roy tells the story, he of course places himself in the shoes of the character of the main hero, the Black Bandit. But what starts as an innocent adventure tale peels back his insecurities and faults. The story of the Black Bandit gradually aligns with Roy's real-life heartbreak and injury. For a guy stuck in a hospital bed between his influence on Alexandria and how he projects onto his own story, he becomes a very active character, clearly using his new friend to process his own trauma. Lee Pace does a sensational job here, able to look like a big-chinned hero with easy-to-discern charisma and a vulnerable sobbing mess at his worst.
You'll be in a wheelchair, everyone's going to think you're this character, and then we're going to shoot the fantasy in India. I mean, it was the most insane meeting I've ever had in my career. And of course, I was like, yes, yeah, absolutely. I want to do it.
Roy's salvation is begotten by Alexandria, who views the jaded stuntman through innocent eyes. Roy tries to take out his despair by exposing the bandits and his friends within his own story to calamity and even death, only for Alexandria to weigh in and save them time after time. It could come off like Roy is just trauma dumping on this child, but it becomes increasingly clear that Alexandria's idealism is something he can be healed by, the only one through whom Roy learns to love the Black Bandit and, by extension, himself. Working as a teacher through most of my adulthood, people don't always talk about how burdening it can feel to be seen through the ideal eyes of kids. Almost everyone a child spends a significant amount of time with is a role model of some extent, and I've had to levy the mistakes I've made as a human and my personal faults with the fact that I'm irreversibly a blueprint for a whole generation I'm responsible for. I think this is no small part of why Roy and Alexandria's dynamic hit me so hard. To see Roy feel his own regrets cleansed by Alexandria's interjections is something I don't think a lot of movies touch on as far as a way of combating generational trauma goes. How simple listening and friendship can authentically go a long way. The Fall was filmed over 4 years. According to Tarsem, it was all done on location, with no sets, green screens, or CGI. Granted, there's some debate as to how true that could possibly be, taking some of the film's set pieces into mind, and even I, as sort of a layman, can't help but feel some questions are raised by such an insistence. But even if he was exaggerating, it must have been only a little, because this film is gorgeous. The sort of disparate ideas and aesthetics glued together by the overall dreamlike tone of the adventure. Since it's so far out and frantic, you never question where they are because the answer is they're inside a story. It's a desert, an oasis, a dynasty, an archipelago, whatever the characters need at a moment's notice. The movie does a great job ingratiating you to its own terms that way, yet it doesn't lose steam when you cut back to Roy and Alexandria in reality. It could be a real bummer to snap back to the real world in a lesser film, but in addition to being the emotional core of the movie, Roy and Alexandria's chemistry and humor is infectious. Katinka Untaru, who holds her own despite being no older than 7 when this movie was made, is owed a lion's share of this back and forth. She didn't pursue acting very much after this, at least as far as I can tell, but she'd go down on my Mount Rushmore of all-time great child performances.
Reflecting back, I've worked for, about 20 years since, and with a lot of different actors, and the experience I had working with Katinka, it's the hardest thing and the easiest thing in the world to do, to just relax and believe your character and believe the story. And with Katinka, who had nothing standing in the way of believing that story, she brought me right with her.
I think the cliche of hating kids in movies is less the inherent annoying factor of kids, and more that getting kids to act and speak authentically is extraordinarily difficult. And especially considering my day job is teaching, most people can smell a phony kid a mile away, which makes a child performance whose energy and curiosity feels authentic all the more endearing.
Take 2 turns to the left and go to the bathroom.
No, you read my note.
What are you talking about? Go to the bathroom.
There's a good chance you heard of this movie before I told you about it, but if you haven't, you might be wondering why you never heard of it. It premiered at TIFF in 2006, where the Weinstein Company expressed interest in distributing it, but the story goes that Harvey Weinstein walked out of the film 15 minutes in. This should be taken with a grain of salt, but Tarsem even claims that Weinstein tried to sabotage the film's release. If nothing else, his reaction was probably poison for the film's reputation among executives. It took 2 years after its festival debut to get its head above water with Summit Entertainment, a relatively small distributor with far less reach than a Warner or a Weinstein. This, along with The Fall's lack of an incredibly clear audience or marketing angle, or even an easy premise to describe, caused it to end its theatrical run, making about $3 million, just a tenth of its reported budget. And this isn't what I would call a box office failure, as it's very clearly Tarsem's passion project above all else, something he poured a great deal of his own money into over several years. Meaning it's hard to say it truly sank money the way a big studio tentpole does when it goes belly up.
I think it was about 26 years of trying to put the story together, about 19 years of location scouting, and about 9 years of looking for the child. And then when I found the child, I just said, sell everything, we're making the movie in 3 months because that's a different child soon.
But it's frankly about to plain as see why this blank check for Tarsem was one and done. He would never make something this audacious again, relegated to movies that I have a hard time believing exist in our zeitgeist to this day. The Fall didn't have the word of mouth or forthcoming inclinations to find its audience in 2008, and it largely faded into obscurity. For many years, it was only legally watchable via out-of-print Blu-rays that sold for extortionate amounts online. It wasn't until just last year that a restoration was put in theaters by art house distributor Mubi, with whom The Fall has a home on their streaming service to this day. And something of a white whale was achieved at last, and I really do have to vouch that seeing this one on the big screen during that limited run was an unforgettable experience. I think in a world where Everything Everywhere All at Once and Mad Max Fury Road can be Oscar champions, The Fall found its era here and now. Even if it's not a household name per se, you can see folks gradually discover it, and among the reality-bending peers it's developed, it's made something of a name for itself. It's something wholly original and a delight to behold. And now that it's been properly restored and preserved, I'm ecstatic to see a whole new generation fall in love with this diamond in the rough that was light years ahead of its time. A more imaginative and sensitive film you will not find this year.
Continue.